So for years, if you dared to criticize the Black Lives Matter movement and all of the race-hustling hacks that made millions off it, you were called a racist, a bigot, a Nazi. People like me told you at the time how dangerous the BLM movement was because of what they actually believe and the people they're in bed with. And now finally we know I was right. This goes way beyond the irony of so-called trained Marxists raising money off the back of BLM and buying fancy houses in California. We're now at the point where Black Lives Matter is defending, dismissing, and cheering on the genocide of Jews. So here's what the Chicago's BLM chapter shared. I stand with Palestine, and an image of a paragliding terrorist. Oh, and the caption, that is all, that is it, whatever that means. Here's another one of their posts. It's a cartoon of two women of color talking. One of them apparently needs new socks. The first says, but that still doesn't mean what Hamas are doing is okay. And what's the insane response? There is a lot of disinformation being spread about what Hamas are doing based in racist and Islamophobic tropes of Muslims and Arabs. Misinformation with absolutely no evidence. How can you be so quick to condemn an entity you know absolutely nothing about? Such disinformation is being used to dehumanize the Palestinian civilians that Israel has declared genocide upon in Gaza. Misinformation! Hamas is live streaming this. You have news outlets who for years have made excuses for Palestinian terrorists who are now reporting that babies have had their heads cut off. What are you talking about? Also, how is it Islamophobic to condemn the murder of Jewish babies? I guess when in doubt, cry racism. What about this one? But that doesn't make taking Israeli hostages okay. The few Israeli hostages are in fact Israeli soldiers, and Israeli army generals who are responsible for keeping Palestinians hostage in the world's largest open-air prison, Gaza. The 2.4 million Palestinians held hostage are all civilians. Again, none of this is true. Are babies and children Israeli soldiers? No. And if Gaza is the world's largest open-air prison, then why is Israel evil for closing the border, but Egypt isn't? No one's talking about Egypt. We know why, because this is all about Jews. BLM hates Jews. What about Black Lives Matter in the UK, who said, solidarity with those resisting Israeli war crimes and military occupation. We say free Palestine and support the practical solidarity of Palestine action. Beheading babies and raping women and butchering families is resistance? Black Lives Matter grassroots also declared solidarity with Palestinians. They described the rape of women, the beheading of children, families being burned alive as a desperate act of self-defense. BLM across the country and across the world were pushing literal Hamas propaganda this week. But don't be shocked, this is who they've always been. Here's Patrice Cullors, a Marxist who went on a shopping spree with BLM donations, calling for the destruction of Israel back in 2015.
The other thing I'll say is Palestine is our generation South Africa. And if we don't step up boldly and courageously to end the imperialist project that's called Israel, we're doomed. And I think that I had learned about Palestine for a long time. I had known about it, been wanting to travel, and I was really, really grateful when the Dream Defenders asked me to come on the delegation. But nothing would have prepared me for the level of militarization and the level of violence that we would witness those 10 days inside of Palestine. Nothing would have prepared me for the ways in which we witness people's terror. People live in terror on a daily basis. And nothing would have prepared me for how much clarity I would have on why we have to be a part of Palestinian solidarity.
But people need to wake up and realize that this is only happening because the country refused to be honest. BLM used the label of racism to scare everyone and as a threat to shut them up. It worked for most people, but now they can finally see what they supported. And all of this is also happening because anti-Semitism exists across a broad political spectrum, but people refuse to admit it. They refuse to admit that there's Islamic anti-Semitism. They refuse to admit that there's black anti-Semitism. They refuse to admit that there's left-wing anti-Semitism. And these are all at the center of what BLM represents. An ideology that feeds on chaos and hate and the destruction of Western values. So yeah, it's good that BLM finally proved so many of us right, but isn't it scary that they feel comfortable enough to say it out loud? To actually admit it? To stand happily shoulder to shoulder with the people butchering men, women and children simply because they're Jewish? This is who BLM is because this is who BLM always was. And if you still think Black Lives Matter, which they do because all lives matter, then maybe it's time you ask yourself if Jewish lives matter too.